And Si and I are just going to have a little discussion with you around how you can use technology effectively, because one of the things that we are really starting to see now is that in the early days of lockdown, back in March and going into April, a lot of companies put temporary measures in place to make sure that they could cope with staff working from home. And that's been great, because the eye has always been on, well, those staff are coming back to the office and that will be the end of lockdown, and then we'll return to normal. And what we're seeing is that that now really is not the case. It is a case of we have to remain flexible. So the technology and the infrastructures that we have for working from home, remote working, they need to be made more permanent so that they can support staff going forward. But we are very much seeing that people still don't fully understand how to set the strategy behind how they can get their software infrastructure, their telecommunications infrastructure, their whole IT side of it sorted in a way that supports flexibility. So, Si, what do you think businesses should be doing? What do you think could really help businesses right now with having that flexible approach, but making sure that they are more geared for working from home as on a permanent basis?
Well, I think it's a really good question, Tracy. And what I'm seeing a lot is that people are so tense and stressed by actually keeping their businesses running that it's trying to get the headspace to engage with that question in the right way. I think they find it very difficult because all the focus and of course people are worried about the finances, people are worried about getting the business in, people are worried about their staff and all the stuff that Phil's just been talking about. But so often technology can make a massive difference to how efficiently and effectively those things work. And if management could take some space to understand that more clearly, I think they could have a much better impact on their organizations. And when we're going into organizations and seeing them use the tools inefficiently and ineffectively and not making use of the functionality that they've paid for, that's really difficult, because you just so want to help them. You so want them to be actually helping themselves. And it would reduce some of the stress, and then Phil would be happy, because we're looking after our staff. But it's getting the headspace to do that. So, for example, if you look at the use of Teams, we all use Teams for communication, and it's almost like that's the goal. Well, in actual fact, that's not the goal. that's like a first step in Teams, is to be able to talk to each other and communicate. But if you actually are able to make the leap of faith in migrating your life into Teams and actually doing everything that you're doing with an organization within Teams, the effects of that can be massive. So you can have a real tangible impact to the amount of emails that you're dealing with day to day. Because if you've moved that conversation into a Teams environment, then you are automatically becoming more efficient, because you're not driven by your emails. And so many of us become driven by the inbox rather than by the focus of things that we're trying to do. And that's one just clear example of how migrating into some of these technologies can make a difference. There are many tools that sit in the background, but the other bit for me that I always see is people living in shared areas still. And in this whole realm of working from home, Teams, and there are other similar applications, but Teams enables you to keep your documents within that environment, which means that whether you're at home, whether you're on a train, whether you're in a cafe, whether you're meeting with a client, you can access all those documents and update them and maintain them when you're not plugged into the internet, for example. But it also means things like, if you're in a spreadsheet and it's crashed, you haven't lost all of your information because it's constantly saving. And these things you can miss unless you're having the conversation about how we can be more efficient and effective as an organization.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we know how teams can benefit because we're using it. So, you know, we've adopted it. We live within that team's environment. So we make sure that everything we do stems from teams, whether that's collaboration and file work, or whether that's meetings, events, or whether it's just chats, or whether it's planning things using Planner. So we kind of live within that environment, but other people don't. And it's always that case if people don't know what they don't know. So they can't see what they're missing out on because they've never had that opportunity to work in that way. And I think, you know, we're seeing from bigger organisations' perspective, there's starting to be a divide between the IT department and the end users.
Absolutely.
And particularly around teams, IT departments are locking down, and I understand the need for security and for GDPR compliance. So, you know, I understand all of that sort of compliance side of it, but they're locking teams down in some cases so tightly that end users can't make use of it. Now, in that instance, the IT department, in my view, should not be running the business. But equally, the business end needs to talk to the IT department because the business end won't necessarily understand the risks that they place themselves under by allowing remote access by guests and all that kind of stuff that sits in there. But if you're really going to get the best out of a Teams implementation, you have to have both those people talking to each other. So it requires a top level strategy. So if you are an organisation that has an internal IT department, or if you're outsourcing to a managed services provider, then include them in the conversation so that they start to get a feel for the business itself and why users need the functionality that they need, because Microsoft are providing it. You know, it's there in the licensing, as you said, Si. It's something that people are paying for anyway, and there is such a lot of value to be unlocked by using those applications. It doesn't make sense to shut them off because people will always find a way around them. End users will always find a way to do what they need to do, irrespective of what the IT department does to try and lock them out. So it's better to have it in a contained and safe environment where you've got security and compliance that you can put into the Azure Active Directory, you can put it into that Teams environment. But, you know, are you seeing the same thing when you're talking to our clients as well, Si?
All the time, Tracy. And I think that this, you know, IT functions, I mean, any IT manager, you know, they run ragged. They've got so much on their plate and so much to think about. And but you can miss the point. So take GDPR, you know, in shared drives, so often people don't actually know who's got access to that shared drive. And in Teams, because of the way and nature in which it works, you always know who can see that information. And also in terms of your retention policies and things like that, you know, there's a lot of strength in there, but you can miss it because you're busy trying to protect. And I think that's difficult. It's a really difficult rub for IT organizations, but also for the businesses who, interestingly, you know, as you're trying to train and show people how to use some of this stuff, actually the organization, and not just really IT, but also the management of the organization, it's pushing it down. But in fact, if they understood it at a management level, I think they would embrace it so much more wholeheartedly, because they would see the benefits to the day-to-day, to all of their staff and to themselves. You know, so that access clarity, the email reduction, the whole remote working effectiveness, you know, even being able to access the history of documents as they've changed. You know, there's so much richness in there, and you can just miss it because we're busy. And it's not to, you know, belittle people's busyness, because of course there's so much at the moment for us to focus on. But how do you get your head into more of a strategic view that says this is how we want our business to work, and we want to get that efficiency, that effectiveness, therefore we need to embrace these things, and I can't afford actually to miss that conversation.
No, I totally agree. And, you know, from a communications perspective, it is a brilliant tool that can really make a difference to make sure that your staff still feel part of an organisation. And it is then down to the mental health aspects that Phil spoke about. When you have remote workers, how do you talk to them? How do you communicate with them? An email is very one directional. So you send something, you wait, somebody sends you something back. Whereas if you're working in a Teams environment, it's much more like WhatsApp or sort of text messaging or Messenger and things like that, where it's in real time and people can have much more of a conversation. So it gives a little bit more feeling to it. It doesn't replace face-to-face, but where you can't have face-to-face meetings and you can't talk to people directly, it's almost the next best thing. And of course you can keep those chats, and you can set retention policies, as you said, Si, to make sure that you keep them there, or you only keep them for a certain length of time before they go. So there is a balance to be had between the technology and the risks posed by the technology, but also the business and the opportunities for that business to increase its operational efficiency. And if we're really to come out of this in a better position, out of the pandemic, then making better use of technology has to be a key component of that strategy.